Well, hello and welcome. My name is Travis. I'm the lead pastor here at the Vine, and this is Jordan.
I'm Jordan. Hello.
Yeah, we are continuing a conversation that we started a number of weeks back, where we're talking about what does it look like to jump into 2023 God first. And so this last week, we're just kind of highlighting the sermon that Jordan preached actually this last week, which was excellent. And he was dealing with the topic of idols and worshiping idols or having an idol in our life. And so, Jordan, right off the bat, for people that maybe weren't there on Sunday, maybe give an idea of like, what does that mean? Because that could sound kind of antiquated. Like, what do you mean idols?
Right.
We don't worship those anymore. What is that about?
Well, yeah, and it does. It seems completely primal and way before us and below us and lower intelligence phase of history to be worshiping idols. One of the reasons, I think what you got to look at when you look at idol worship in an ancient sense is what was it and why was it? Like, why did they do it? And that's how you bridge the gap into today. So when you look at what it was, is there's a couple different reasons someone would worship an idol in that time. There was different types of idols, but idol worship in that time existed normally to appease a being in order to receive some sort of a blessing that provided for the needs of the individual.
Gotcha.
They started to worship the sun because we realized early on in human history that without the sun, there's certain things that don't take place, like photosynthesis and growth in nature, and people were like, we need that. So they began to worship the sun to say, if we can just keep this big orange ball in the sky happy, then he's going to give us what we need. And so that was the ancient version of idol worship, and it spanned into all kinds of different things, into entertainment. You see this in the Roman Colosseums where they would worship these gods of war and brutality, and they would worship them by allowing men and women to kill themselves and each other in this Colosseum in honor of this god so that they would have luck in the battles that they were getting ready to go into.
So how does that translate to today? Like as we kind of walk through, applying that to today, what does that look like?
So if in ancient times idol worship was looking to something or someone in order to appease them so we would be provided for, we got to look at it today in a sense of, though the idol looks different, and though we might not have a statue in the middle of our city or in the middle of our home, what are we looking to, or who are we looking to, and trying to appease with all of our time, with all of our intentionality, with all of our emotional, intimacy, in order to be provided for. And in what we see in Scripture is, Bible says, this is in the Old Testament, God says, "Put no other gods before me." And then that's also talked about later on in the Scriptures, talking about worship the Lord your God with your heart, your soul, all your mind, and all your strength.
Yeah.
Are we giving more of our heart, our soul, our mind, and strength to something else other than God? If so, it's just a continuation of idol worship. It's the same basic concept.
No, that's good. I think for me, as we listened to the message on Sunday, one of the things that really stood out to me was not only for myself to ask the question. And so we did actually, Jennica and I, Monday's our day off. And so we sat down and we talked through, like, what are some ways in our life that we have allowed something to come between us and God, whatever that thing is. And so we were talking about things like how much time are we spending on our phones? How much time are we spending doing social media? How much time are we spending watching Netflix or movies or things like that? Are those things in check, or have they become something that we do to either numb our lives in some way, and it becomes a barrier between us and God? But then the other thing that you talked about that I thought was really good was a parenting element to this, like just this idea of, are we guarding our homes in a way that we're protecting our kids from some of those kinds of things, because they're getting kind of from all ends in culture right now. So what does that look like?
Man, we have in our neighborhood, me and Cheyenne there's a dog that lives in our neighborhood, a bulldog, and he's a couple houses down from us. When we go on walks, we could be a block away from this house, and that bulldog, his ears perk up and he leans forward and he starts barking. If you get too close, he's going to chase you because he does not want you getting in his yard. I think one of the number one things we can do as parents is number one, be aware.
Mm.
Be aware like that bulldog. It doesn't mean everything is an enemy and
Sure.
everyone is an enemy.
Right.
It
Yeah.
doesn't mean every TV show is like, oh, my kid gets distracted with video games. They must be an idol.
Because you can take this to extreme.
You can
right?
take this to an extreme.
Yeah.
Everything gets demonized. That's not the thing. But let's keep our ears perked up as parents. Be ultra aware.
Yeah.
Is there something in what my kids are participating in?
Yeah.
Or is there just something about the thing in general they're participating with that could be allowing for distraction from God? Or even, we talked about this Sunday a little bit, and this is where it seems
Sure.
like real crazy, but it's just true. Could I be allowing some sort of an influence spiritually that I don't want in my yard through these different things? We talked about horror movies and how I don't think if you've ever seen a horror movie, then you're going to have demonic activity in your life. But I will say this, when you consistently allow it to be an influence in your life and a part of your life, I've just tethered a lot of lines between people who watch horror movies and anxiety or fear or depression. There's a spiritual thing on it. So I would say, number one, be aware like the bulldog and say, what's going on, and do I need to bark at anything and say, hey, no, you're not coming in my yard. I'm not allowing you.
Yeah.
The other thing is be willing to chase it. Be willing to fight.
I think that's good. Yeah, I think there are times, we subtly, I think the pendulum swing, has been growing up in an environment where sometimes we didn't want to be parents that didn't allow our kids to watch Disney or didn't allow our kids to.
Right.
But at the same time, I recognize sometimes there's things in Disney that's unhealthy. So we've tried to coach our kids through those things as opposed to just cut it off completely. Mm-hmm. But I think there's other times where it really is like, no, there's just no good fruit that would come out of my kids being exposed to this and us cutting that out and being vigilant enough and willing enough to say as parents, yeah, I know it in some ways deprives our kids of something, but the reality is it doesn't. It's protecting.
There's a story of a king in the Old Testament, and I had it written on a piece of paper. I'm not going to say it because I don't want to misspeak his name, but there's a story of a king. I want to say it's Hezekiah, but I'm not sure. In the Old Testament, there's a king that allows some emissaries from other countries into his courts and allows them to see every part of his house. Yeah. Then a prophet comes to him and says, because you've done this, not in your time, but in your child's time, there will be a destruction that happens and the kingdom's going to be taken from your family. Yeah. And the king says, well, this word from the Lord is good because at least my days will be peaceful. But my child, it'll happen in a time where I'm not around anymore. Yeah. And I listen to that story, like, that's dad of the year right there. But what that makes me think about is sometimes I think of things within the lens of my experience, and I say, my life doesn't seem too affected by these things. And so I seem to be able to handle myself around watching these kind of things or allowing these things in or engaging with this. But what we have to understand is that legacy-wise, that king's child was actually hindered and reaped the benefit of the complacency of his father. And so one of the important things about bulldogging and being a bulldog towards some of those the spiritual things that we've got to guard our home from is not so much about your experience now. It's about the foundation we're setting for our family in the future and what kind of destruction could it cause if we normalize our kids to things that this doesn't belong in our home. And so again, you gotta use discernment in your part on that. But
I think that another important element to this too that I would just say, you have to kind of take this with a little bit of discernment as you do this in your home. Because you can easily step into kind of a religious duty, lifeless approach to this too. And the whole point of all of this is fostering an environment, one, where we are drawn closer in relationship to Jesus, and then two, that we're providing an environment for our kids that they can be introduced to Jesus and kind of grow up in an environment that fosters closeness in relationship with him. And so it's not like all about the rules of you can and can't do this or that. It really does stem from what are we guarding against that really just bears no fruit, and actually can maybe even bear like bad fruit in our children's lives and in our lives as well. And so I think I just want to be aware that this is not a religious duty thing. This is a vigilance towards guarding our homes in a healthy way.
And it could be good. Like, I think the key is to say, like, I'm not just talking about horror movies. I think what we're talking about is also, I really love my favorite sports team, and I am so devoted to them that there are times I've realized about myself that I will devote so much time and thought, and I'll find myself meditating on like the statistics and the stuff to where I'm actually, it's hindering my relationship with God.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that that's evil.
Right.
It just means that maybe I'm devoting more to it than it was intended for me to give.
Yeah.
You know, and so idol worship can technically trickle into just being a little bit too engrafted and just welcoming of anything into our schedule, cluttering us up so much that there's not much room for us to engage with God fully and intentionally.
Yeah, because it could be hobbies. It could be.
Anything,
there's a lot of things. It could be good things. It can be good things.
Yeah.
So give one or two practical things that this week, as somebody's watching, they're thinking like, how can I go about guarding my home or start to identify maybe some of those areas?
Well, I'm going to start with one of the points I gave Sunday, and I think it's prayer. Some of this stuff is Paul says in Ephesians 6:12. He says we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual authorities. Not good spiritual authorities, bad ones. Our war is a spiritual war. There is God who is spirit, and then there's our enemy, the adversary. And he's got a strategy spiritually on how he wants to keep the church from engaging and living a full life with God. That means that we're not always going to see things with our naked eye like, oh man, there's something on it. It's spiritually discerned. It's spiritually discerned. So I would say the first thing is pray. Just pray a very honest and open prayer. Lord, open my eyes to what do I need to see? What are some things coming down the road that I shouldn't let in my yard? I would say that's the first thing, is just allow God to open your eyes to some things. Second thing would be just be willing to obey when you see it. Those are the kind of prayers, and I think some people call those like dangerous prayers because they're the ones God answers very, very regularly. He answers prayers, but when you ask him stuff like that, he's going to show you. And when he shows you, take a step. I'm not saying don't take a leap. I wouldn't say cut off everything and I've got idols I need to get rid of. No, don't do that. Take a step. Say, Lord, what's my first step in devoting myself to you fully? What do I need to trim off completely, or maybe just eliminate a little bit of the time I spend on this? Take a step in it. And I think the fruit of this for you will be peace in your relationship with God. I've heard a lot lately, people saying, I just feel like there's like a fog between me and God. And I love the Lord and I believe in Jesus, but I feel like there's something keeping me from hearing his voice or experiencing him fully. I got a feeling that there may be some hidden idols in your life. And I'm not saying you're running and living in rampant sin. I'm saying that maybe there's just some things that are in your life that you need to shave some time away from or push back completely. I don't know, but
I heard it explained like this, especially in reference to hearing from God. It's kind of like this, if you were to go into a mountainous area and you were to look up in the sky, at nighttime you would see the stars really clearly. They'd just be vibrant and beautiful. But if you were to go into a city with all the light pollution from all the surrounding lights and the chaos around you, and you were to look up, all you would see is kind of this glowing light. You wouldn't see any of the stars. And I thought that was such a good kind of picture of even this, where there are things in our life that can cloud our ability to hear God. There are things that will cloud our ability to see God's activity in our lives. And so it's helpful if we can identify what are some of those things and begin to remove those things from our life, because now not only can we hear God and see God, but we can now start to obey God and follow. And that's when we really see transformation in our lives.
It's huge. And one thing that's really important as we're kind of wrapping all this up is just to know that in the Old Testament, when you talk about idol worship, it's such a heavy word. This is what it was. Again, like I mentioned, what Paul says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. The enemy in the Old Testament, his strategy was to distract God's people from God's way and his voice. If he could just get them distracted, that was enough. And he used idol worship in that day. He's still using it today. And though idol worship looks different, all it is anything that the enemy could use to keep you cluttered. And I love that light pollution example, because that's really all it is. We give it some heavy thing like, well, I'm not worshiping my job. I'm not worshiping my money. But could it be polluting the sky to where you're not seeing the things God is meaning to show you, just because you're just a little distracted and cluttered with these different things that are taking too much ground in your life?
Yeah, it's pushing out the things that are important. So, well, those are some thoughts for you to think about this week. So I would encourage you, take a look inside of your life and decide what are some of the things, and just pray, ask God. God will show you. Feel pretty convinced of that. So, well, you guys have a great week, and we will see you next time.
All right, take it easy.
See you later.